The stagecoach slowed and came to a full stop before the weathered wooden sign carved with the words, Dust Ridge, Arizona Territory, 1885. Dust rose in a soft, dull cloud that clung to Naomi Carter's dress, as if urging her to stay put before she stepped down. She stood, yet her legs felt unsteady, her heart pounding hard enough to choke each breath rising in her throat. She had left Georgia behind. More than 2,000 miles of road, the low wooden house, the graveyard where her father rested, and the life she could no longer hold together. This journey was not only a change of land, it was a new life shaped by other people's decisions and by the weight that had settled on her shoulders the day her father died. "Last stop, Dust Ridge," the driver called, his voice rough. Naomi adjusted her worn bonnet, drew the edge of her skirt, trying to hide the tremor in her hand. The Arizona sun struck her face, hot, dry, stealing the breath from her chest. She inhaled, steadying whatever fragile calm she could hold. As she stood beside her valise, a low, older voice sounded behind her. "Miss Carter?" Naomi turned. A gray-haired man with broad shoulders and dark eyes beneath his brim gave her a courteous nod. "I'm Sheriff Maddox. Elijah Red asked me to fetch you." Elijah Red, the man she was meant to marry. An older ranch owner, wealthy, known for being strict but successful. Her mother had called this marriage your last chance at a decent life. Naomi was not sure about the word decent, but she knew she had no other choice left. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, keeping her manners though her thoughts churned. "It's good to meet you." Sheriff Maddox lifted her trunk onto the wagon, and they left the depot. The wheels rolled over a dusty road, flanked by low wooden buildings, plain storefronts, and beyond them a long line of mountains like a wall along the horizon. Naomi took it all in, yet inside she felt only a quiet, persistent fear. A life with a man she had never seen outside of ink on paper. Could that life ever hold happiness? Sheriff Maddox glanced at her, his tone meant to reassure. "Mr. Red is a respected man, strong, successful. You won't lack for anything there." Naomi nodded, though her heart stayed uneasy. There was a hollow in her chest his words could not fill. After 20 minutes, the sheriff halted his horse on a ridge. From there, the valley opened wide below them. "There," he said, pointing, "is Red Rock Ranch." A vast spread lay before her. A white main house, clean stables, cattle grazing across the fields. A large barn standing firm in the sun. A place many women in the East might dream of. Yet Naomi felt the weight in her chest deepen. Suddenly, the thrum of hooves rang across the ground. Both she and the sheriff turned. A rider approached, a man firm in the saddle, moving with the kind of ease born from a lifetime on horseback. As he rode closer, Naomi saw his eyes, dark brown, steady yet bright, meeting hers in the first instant. His horse stopped before the wagon. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair swept loose by the wind. "I'm Tobias Red," he said, his voice deep, edged with gravel. "I manage Mr. Red's ranch." Naomi stared. She had assumed Tobias was the man she would marry. But the man before her was younger than she expected, stronger, his eyes nothing like those of a man past 50. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Carter." When she lowered her hand for him to assist her, his palm brushed her wrist. Just a moment. A faint jolt ran along her spine. She pulled back slower than she intended. Tobias paused a half-beat before letting go. "Mr. Elijah Red will return in 3 days," Sheriff Maddox said. "You'll stay in the main house with Rosa until then." Tobias nodded, his gaze staying on Naomi longer than needed. There was something in his eyes that unsettled her, more than the desert sun. "Come along, Miss Carter," Tobias said, his voice gentler. "I'll take you inside." As she stepped down, the desert wind tugged at her skirt, and Tobias Red's eyes followed her every small movement, quiet, steady, revealing something that had begun to take shape from the first moment their hands met. When the wagon stopped before the ranch house, Naomi lifted her gaze to the white building with its soft blue window frames. It was clean, spacious, and stately in the way Western wealth often presented itself. Yet beneath that polished exterior, she sensed an emptiness, something cold that did not come from the wooden walls, but from the absent man who owned them. Rosa, a round, kind-faced Mexican woman in her middle years, hurried onto the porch the moment Tobias helped Naomi down. "Santa Maria," Rosa breathed, taking Naomi's hands in her warm grasp. "Señorita Carter, we did not expect you this early, but thank the heavens you arrived safely." Rosa's warmth eased Naomi more than any reassurance Sheriff Maddox had offered. Tobias stood behind them, lifting Naomi's trunk from the ground with an easy motion, as if it weighed no more than a cloth bag. "Your room is upstairs," he said quietly. "I'll take this up." Naomi followed Rosa into the house. The interior was surprisingly refined, polished wooden floors, a hand-woven Mexican rug she was afraid to step on too firmly, Eastern landscape paintings along the walls, a long walnut dining table. Everything looked too perfect, too still, like a place meant to receive visitors, not to be lived in. While Naomi was taking it in, Tobias climbed the stairs with her trunk on his shoulder. He said nothing, but each time he glanced down to be sure she was keeping up, his gaze lingered longer than necessary. Not rude, not curious, more like holding something back. Rosa led her to the last room at the end of the hall. "This will be your room until the master returns." The room was unexpectedly large, soaked in warm light from a wide window. A four-poster bed stood under a finely embroidered quilt. Naomi traced the edge of the blanket with her fingers, feeling out of place amid the unfamiliar luxury. Tobias set the trunk where she indicated, dipped his head in a small nod, and turned to go. But he paused in the doorway. He did not look at her, just toward the window, before speaking softly. "I hope you'll be comfortable. If you need anything, ask Rosa." Then he stepped out. But Naomi knew he had wanted to say more and had chosen not to. Dinner that evening passed with more silence than conversation. Only Naomi, Rosa, and Tobias sat at the table. Rosa kept trying to draw Naomi into small talk, but each time she answered, Tobias would look up, quickly, neatly, yet with a gaze that carried more unspoken weight than any words. When Rosa poured water, Naomi reached for her glass. Tobias moved at the same moment out of instinct. Their fingers touched at the rim, so lightly it could have been ignored, if both had not frozen at once. Naomi felt the warmth of his touch travel along her wrist, and Tobias pulled back with a faint start, as if jolted. "My apologies," he murmured, withdrawing slowly. "It's all right," Naomi said, though her voice had softened. They ate, in silence, yet the air between them was anything but quiet. Later that night, Naomi could not sleep. Moonlight spread across the yard, casting long, pale eucalyptus shadows on the sand. She wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch to breathe. A moment later, a door opened softly behind her. "I didn't mean to startle you," Tobias said, stepping out with a small oil lamp. "I'm checking the stables." Naomi offered a faint smile. I only needed a bit of air. He stood beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt the warmth from his shoulder drift into the space between them. They looked out at the sky, a dense scatter of stars, more than Naomi had ever seen in her life. Nights here, they feel wide, she whispered. Wide enough to make a person feel small, Tobias replied, his voice low, but wide enough to show what truly matters. Naomi turned to him. He was no longer looking at the sky. He was looking at her, his gaze soft and clear, as if asking a question she was not ready to answer. I hope, he said slowly, you won't feel too alone in this place. Naomi felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but because she could not understand how a man she barely knew had seen through her loneliness after only one afternoon. I'll be all right, she said gently. And thank you for your kindness. Tobias nodded, his eyes calm under the moonlight. Yet in that moment, Naomi knew something had begun. Quiet but certain. A feeling that should not bloom, yet already had. A feeling that would not fade when morning came. Naomi woke to the pale morning light slipping through the curtains, the scent of coffee and toasted bread drifting through the air. She changed into a simple cotton dress and went downstairs to the kitchen. Rosa stood by the stove, stirring a pot of cornmeal, her face as warm as it had been the day they met. Buenos dias, señorita, Rosa greeted, her kind eyes resting on Naomi as though she were family. Did you sleep well? Better than I expected, Naomi said, settling at the small wooden table by the window. Rosa set a bowl of porridge before her, along with a steaming cup of coffee. Mr. Elijah is very respected in this region, Rosa said, as Naomi ate, her gaze drifting around the cozy kitchen. But he is firm, wants everything his way, does not like anyone going against him. Naomi paused mid-spoon. Firm? In what sense? Rosa avoided her eyes and only shook her head lightly. You will understand in time. I only hope he treats you well. The harmless words sent a faint chill down Naomi's spine, though the morning sun warmed the window pane. After breakfast, Naomi stepped outside for a walk, hoping to grow familiar with the place she was expected to call home. A few ranch hands were already at work, leading horses from their stalls, checking fences, gathering tools. A red-haired young man greeted her first. Morning, Miss Carter. You're Mr. Red's betrothed, right? Naomi answered with a polite smile. Yes, I'm Naomi. That's Ben, Tobias said from the direction of the stables, his voice deep and steady. Naomi startled a little at his sudden appearance, yet her pulse eased the moment she heard him. And this, he added, nodding toward an older man feeding a horse, is Samuel. Both men greeted her kindly, but when she asked gently, Does Mr. Elijah come to the ranch often? Ben and Samuel both looked away. Only Tobias met her eyes, though he stayed silent. The master travels a lot, Samuel answered vaguely. And when he's here, everything runs very orderly. The word orderly came out with careful restraint, as though saying it any stronger would verge on disrespect. In contrast, when Naomi said, I can see everyone respects Mr. Red's foreman, Ben burst into laughter, and Samuel nodded so hard it bordered on comical. Best foreman in Arizona, Ben said. No one knows the land and cattle like he does. Naomi glanced toward Tobias. He dipped his head slightly, avoiding their looks, though a faint flush touched his sun-darkened cheekbones. Would you like me to show you around the ranch? Tobias asked, his voice steady in the Western way. though his eyes hinted at something more hopeful. Naomi nodded. I'd like that. Tobias led her down the stone-lined path, from the main house to the open-air kitchen, past the stables, and toward the stretch of young grass on the western edge. He explained every part: where they cut hay, the water pump, station, the place they set camp when the rains came. Naomi listened closely. She was struck by his care, the way he spoke of each field and each horse, and how he looked at the land as something he was bound to protect. When they stepped down toward the old pens, Naomi slipped on a loose stone. She pitched forward, losing her balance. Tobias reacted faster than she could gasp, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist, steadying her before she fell. They stood so close Naomi could hear the deep rhythm of his breath. She looked up. He looked down. The moment stretched longer than it should, for the fiancé of another man. I'm sorry, Naomi murmured, heat rising in her face. Tobias held on a beat longer before releasing her. Don't apologize, he said quietly. The stones shift here. I should have gone first. As they reached the far stables, Naomi asked what she had been holding back since the day before. Tobias. Yes? What kind of man is Mr. Elijah? Tobias stopped. He did not answer at once. Sunlight fell across his shoulders, tracing the brim of his hat. At last he spoke, slow and measured. He is a determined man, likes control, and he expects a great deal. He looked at her then, his eyes darkening. You should get used to that. A thin, cold line ran through Naomi's chest. Tobias, are you trying to warn me about something? He shook his head, but not firmly enough to turn the denial into truth. I have no right to warn you. I only think you should take care in the next few days. Don't do anything that might test his patience. His gaze softened suddenly, his voice dropping lower. I just don't want you to be hurt. Naomi stood still, breath easing and tightening all at once. The unease inside her grew, yet the warmth she felt from Tobias grew even stronger, though she did not yet understand why. Noon in Dust Ridge came faster than Naomi expected. Sunlight poured from every direction, laying a wavering heat over the grassland. Wanting to adjust to her new life, she walked toward the stables after a simple lunch with Rosa. She knew Tobias had been working there since early morning. She did not find him right away. Instead, a bright voice called out, "Miss Carter?" Naomi turned and saw a young curly-haired boy, sun-browned cheeks, a grin wide as a sunrise. "I'm Charlie Wilkes," he said, cheerful and quick. "I've been working here 2 years." Naomi smiled in return. "Good to meet you, Charlie." "I heard you're going to marry the boss," he said without hesitation. Strange for him to bring someone from so far away. "But you seem like a good person." Naomi let out a soft laugh. "I hope so." She asked a few questions about the ranch. Charlie walked beside her, answering with the earnestness of a boy raised on Western soil. "That pen is for the breeding horses, and over there is where Tobias keeps the ones that need special care," he said, pointing toward a large wooden enclosure. "He understands horses better than anyone I know." "What about Elijah?" Naomi asked, trying to sound casual, though curiosity pulled at her voice. Charlie paused, not evasive like the others, only slower. "Mr. Elijah is a calculating man." He chose each word with care. "He wants everything on this ranch done his way." Naomi caught the caution in his eyes. "And Tobias?" The change was immediate. Charlie brightened. "Mr. Tobias is good, Miss Carter. I owe him a lot. This ranch owes him more than people realize. He bent to pick up a fallen horseshoe, turning it in his hands out of habit. Last year the drought was terrible. Folks thought the herd would die out. But Tobias, he's the one who came up with the plan to drive the cattle up to higher ground, find new water. Naomi's eyes widened. Tobias did that? Yes, Charlie nodded hard. If not for him, this ranch would have lost half its herd. And Elijah? Charlie hesitated, then finally spoke the truth. When it all worked out, Mr. Elijah took the credit with the town and the ranchers around here. Tobias didn't say anything. He never does. He just works. He doesn't fight for praise. Naomi stilled. A breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of dry grass and warm earth. For the first time since arriving in Dust Ridge, she felt a deep, steady respect rise within her. A man who carried the ranch on his back, then stepped aside so another could stand in the spotlight. She began to understand why every ranch hand looked at Tobias with such genuine regard, respect that no money could buy. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Naomi saw Tobias working in the yard. He was fitting a newly braided rein onto a tall black horse. The angled light drew out the strong cuts of muscle along his arms. Naomi stepped closer. "Do you ever rest?" Tobias looked up, surprised to see her, but his expression softened almost instantly. "There's always work on a ranch," he said, "but I don't mind." Naomi stood beside him, close enough to speak, far enough not to betray her own unsteady nerves. "I met Charlie," she said quietly. "He told me you saved the herd last year." Tobias froze for a heartbeat. Not long, just enough for Naomi to notice. "Charlie talks too much," he said with a faint, deflecting smile. "That wasn't a small thing," Naomi replied, meeting his gaze. "You saved the ranch." A thin stillness settled. Tobias finished fastening the rein, but kept his hand on the saddle, as if needing something steady to hold. "I did what had to be done," he said softly. "Elijah is the rancher. He has the right to stand forward. But you're the one who earned it." This time, Tobias did not look away. He held her gaze, long enough to unsettle her breath. "In the West," he said slowly, "folks don't live for praise. They live to protect what needs protecting." Naomi felt her chest tighten at the quiet strength in his voice. Patient, humble, solid. She asked gently, "Tobias, did you grow up here?" He leaned back against the fence, silent for a moment. "I was born in Texas. My mother died when I was 10. My father didn't exactly want me. I left home at 15. His voice was low, steady. "I worked wherever I could. Came to this ranch at 17. Elijah took me in because I worked hard. Everything else didn't matter." Naomi felt a weight settle in her heart. Not pity, but a deep, unmistakable empathy. "You built everything yourself," she said softly. "No one handed anything to you." Tobias looked at her again, warm, steady, and held back by a boundary neither of them named. "You shouldn't look at me like that, Naomi," he murmured, almost a whisper. "You'll make things harder for both of us." Her heartbeat stumbled, but she didn't turn away. Not now. For a brief moment, the evening sun, the light wind, the sound of the horse breathing, everything stilled. And in that stillness, Naomi knew the truth. What grew between them wasn't imagined, wasn't fleeting. It was real, clear, and growing stronger by the day. Naomi had never been familiar with horses. Yet that morning she felt an unexpected thrill. Perhaps because Tobias had asked in that low, gentle voice, "If you'd like, I can teach you to ride. Out here, knowing how to ride sometimes matters more than knowing how to cook." She laughed softly, the first real laugh since arriving in Arizona. Tobias heard it and paused half a second, as though he hadn't expected to hear such a sound. They led 2 horses to a patch of soft grass near the small creek south of the ranch. Tobias chose a calmer horse for her, a dark bay with eyes gentle as early mist. "His name is Holler. Calm as warm water," Tobias said, his hand resting lightly on the horse's mane. Naomi looked at the saddle, then at Tobias. "I have never done this." "I know." He took the reins, stepping closer than she had prepared for. "Do you trust me?" A simple question, yet it caught her breath. Still, she nodded. She already trusted him, she just didn't know when that had happened. Tobias placed his hands at her waist to help her mount. His touch was warm, steady, light enough that she felt held more by presence than strength. When she settled into the saddle, Tobias stood close, his dark eyes fixed on her. "Keep your back straight. Shoulders loose," he said, though his voice was lower than usual, almost a murmur. Naomi tried to follow his instruction, but when he placed his hand over hers to adjust the reins, she lost all focus. It was their 4th touch in 2 days, and the deepest one. His chest brushed close. His breath warmed her cheek like a passing heat. Naomi heard the rhythm of his breathing, saw the short, wind-ruffled strands of hair along his forehead. Too close. Too real. "Your hands like this." Tobias guided her fingers, the heat of his skin spreading through hers. "Don't tense up. Let the horse feel your confidence." Naomi nodded, though her heartbeat had its own wild rhythm. As Holler started walking, Tobias walked beside her, one hand steady on the reins so she wouldn't fear. Naomi laughed, the second time that morning. "This feels better than I thought." "I told you Holler was gentle," Tobias said with a smile that seemed to soften the sun. By midday they rested beneath a tall eucalyptus near the creek. Wind moved through the leaves, making a sound like nature whispering to itself. Naomi sat with Tobias. Not too near, but no longer far. The distance between them had changed the moment he placed his hand over hers. "Tobias," Naomi asked quietly, "if you weren't working on the ranch, what would you want?" Tobias watched the slow-moving water. "There's a small valley north of here. Good soil, good water. I've always thought, if I had land of my own, I'd raise 20 good horses, build a small cabin, and—" He paused, weighing something. "And what?" Naomi asked, voice soft as the breeze. "I'd want a home," Tobias said quietly. "Doesn't need to be big. Just a place I can return to without thinking about every step." Naomi turned toward him. "You've never had that?" Tobias shook his head gently. "No. I've never belonged anywhere." The words fell between them, light but heavy enough to catch in her chest. She didn't know when she placed her hand lightly on his wrist. Tobias looked down at her hand, then up at her, his eyes darkening, deepening, pulled toward a line he was trying not to cross. In that moment, Naomi could not stop the thought. Why must she marry Elijah, a distant, cold man, when her heart was pulling toward the one sitting beside her, with eyes honest enough to undo her? Tobias turned away slightly, drawing a long breath as if collecting himself. "Naomi, we shouldn't—" "I know," she whispered. But she didn't take her hand back. They stayed like that beneath the tree, with the creek's cool mist drifting through the air, and the wind moving lazily across the grass. They spoke no more, but the quiet felt more intimate than any words. They both knew they had crossed a line. They knew, but they also knew it was too late to return to what they had been before. When they rose to head back to the ranch, Naomi felt the shift inside her clear as daylight. Not fear, but the beginning of wanting something else, something her heart chose, not what fate had arranged. And that man walked beside her, one hand on the reins, the other holding something far more dangerous, his growing feelings for a woman promised to another. That evening, the Arizona sky darkened early, as if the land itself sensed something coming. Naomi was helping Rosa clear the supper dishes when Sheriff Maddox rode in, his coat coated with desert dust. He knocked hard on the door, his voice low and clipped. "There's a telegram for Miss Carter." Naomi wiped her hands, her heartbeat quickening for no clear reason. The small slip of paper was placed in her palm, only a few short lines, yet cold enough to drain the blood from her veins. "Return early. Bring the minister. Be ready to wed upon arrival. Elijah Red." The room tilted around her. Rosa set a gentle hand on her shoulder, pity in her eyes, though she said nothing. Sheriff Maddox gave Naomi a knowing look before tipping his hat and leaving. As the door shut, Naomi felt her knees weaken. All evening she paced her room, hands clasped tight. Her mind filled with Elijah, his stern face, his cold gaze, his possessive manner. And threaded through every thought was Tobias, his warm eyes, his steady hands lifting her onto a horse. His voice that afternoon. "Do you trust me?" Now she wasn't sure she trusted herself. Outside, the ranch sank into darkness, lit only by a few wavering oil lamps. When Naomi thought she could bear no more, quiet footsteps sounded in the hallway. A soft knock. "Naomi?" Tobias's voice, deep, low, carrying something he could no longer hold back. Naomi opened the door. Tobias stood in the dim light, his shirt still dusty from the long day, his hair slightly mussed, but his eyes nearly broke her. He looked at her a long moment, as if fighting something burning inside him. "I heard Elijah is coming early," Tobias said, voice rough. "And he's bringing the minister." Naomi couldn't speak. She simply stood there. Tobias drew a breath, steadying himself. "If you choose this marriage, I'll respect it. I swear I won't step into your life another inch. But if you want freedom—" He stopped. His fist tightened. "I'll take you. I'll leave this ranch behind, if that's what it costs." Naomi broke. Tears came before she could hide them. Tobias stepped forward, then paused, waiting for her permission. Naomi moved first. He pulled her into his arms. It was a tight, steady hold, as if the world outside had cracked, and he wanted nothing more than to keep her safe inside that circle of strength. Naomi felt his breath hitch when she pressed close, his hand trembling slightly against her back. "Naomi," he murmured, his voice pained but gentle. "I shouldn't say it, but I—" "Don't," she whispered. "I already know." She lifted her face to him. Tobias's eyes held nothing back now. Gentleness, fear, and something deeper, stronger, beyond reason. Naomi placed her hand on his cheek. That single touch was enough. Tobias lowered his head, slow, careful, until she closed the last distance herself. Their first kiss wasn't rushed or fierce, but deep, long, shaped by everything they had held inside these past days. Tobias cupped her face with both hands, as if she were something too precious to handle roughly. The kiss lingered until Naomi leaned against his chest to breathe. "What are we going to do, Tobias?" she whispered. "Whatever you want," he said, voice low against her skin. "Only what you want." That night, Naomi stayed in Tobias's arms. No haste, no demand, only two people finding each other through quiet tenderness, through a trust neither had time to name. Every motion was soft, natural, as if they had belonged to each other long before they met. Warmth, gentle hands, quiet words, eyes that never drifted away. An intimate night, more of two hearts confessing than anything else. For the first time, Naomi felt seen as a person with worth, not as something to be claimed. Morning broke. Hoofbeats thundered across the yard. Male voices rose, stern, commanding. Naomi jolted awake, clutching a thin shawl around her shoulders, her heart pounding. Tobias stood at the window, his shoulders drawn tight. "Naomi," he turned to her. "He's here." Elijah Red had returned, and the storm had begun. Morning in Dust Ridge was rarely this silent. The hoofbeats that broke the stillness were heavy, not the rhythm of an ordinary traveler, but of someone who believed himself master of the land. Through the window, Naomi saw Elijah Red's glossy black carriage roll through the ranch gate, followed by two unfamiliar riders and a man in clerical clothes. In that moment, the gentle morning she had shared with Tobias shattered like dust in wind. Tobias squeezed her shoulder before leaving the room, his eyes deep and sorrowful, as if he wanted one more second with her but didn't dare take it. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." Naomi nodded, though her hands had gone cold. The front door swung open hard, and Elijah Red entered with the bearing of a man accustomed to power. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his beard neatly trimmed, his black coat carrying the faint scent of fine tobacco. But it was his eyes that chilled her, sharp, appraising, as though weighing an item he intended to claim. "Miss Naomi Carter," Elijah said, his thin smile slicing like a blade. "At last, we meet." Naomi bowed her head with measured grace. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Red." He let his gaze travel over her, smugness barely veiled. "I trust the long journey has not wearied you too much?" Before she could answer, Elijah glanced at Tobias, who stood a few steps away. "Tobias, you have attended to Miss Carter properly, I hope." His voice dipped into something cold. The insult was deliberate, aimed at both of them. Naomi sensed Tobias tense, his shoulders tightening, but he answered with quiet restraint. "I did as you instructed." "Good," Elijah said, lips curving into a cruel line. "I trust you kept the necessary distance." Naomi caught the meaning instantly. Elijah viewed Tobias as a servant, and her as property, soon to bear his name. Elijah turned to her, his voice softening in a controlled, possessive way. "I've brought the minister. We'll have the wedding this afternoon. The delay has been long enough." Naomi drew a slow breath. "Mr. Red, I believe we should wait a little. We've only just met." Elijah gave a hollow laugh. "We exchanged letters for 6 months. That is more than enough, Naomi. I do not care for dithering." Tobias stepped forward, concern flickering in his eyes. "Perhaps Miss Carter needs time to rest. An afternoon—" Elijah snapped his head toward him, eyes darkening. "I did not ask for your opinion, Tobias." The air tightened. Naomi felt the hostility radiating from Elijah like heat. She steadied herself. "Mr. Red, honestly, I'd like to speak with you first." Everything is happening too quickly. Elijah's gaze sharpened, cutting into her. Are you reconsidering? A pause. Or has someone encouraged you to? His pointed glance toward Tobias sent a chill through her. Tobias didn't look away. He stood, firm, silent, and that silence alone made Elijah more certain. Naomi saw it clearly. Elijah sensed danger, and the danger was Tobias. Elijah moved closer to Tobias, standing nearly chest to chest. I saw your expression when I mentioned the wedding, he said, voice smooth as a knife's glide. Remember who pays your wages. Tobias didn't flinch. And I remember who deserves respect, he said, voice low, steady. Naomi saw the flicker in Elijah's eyes, surprise then anger, a small crack in his composure, sharp enough to cut the air. Very well, Elijah said, his calculating smile returning. To allow Miss Carter time to think, we'll delay the ceremony until morning. He turned to the housekeeper. Rosa, escort Miss Carter to her room. But as Elijah passed Tobias, he spoke quietly. Words Naomi heard clearly. Pack your things. From this moment on, you return to the workers' quarters. You are no longer permitted inside the main house. Tobias stood motionless. A blow to his position, his dignity, and the fragile nearness he still held with Naomi. Naomi felt her heart tighten painfully. Elijah had begun his attack, calculated, sharp, intentional, and Naomi understood. From here on, every move would be dangerous. That evening, the ranch house blazed with oil lamps, filled with laughter from the guests Elijah had invited to offer blessings before the wedding. But to Naomi, each lamp felt like a spotlight on the chains tightening around her. Elijah sat beside her, posture rigid, his black coat draped across his shoulders like a mark of heavy authority. She forced polite smiles as people asked about Georgia, about her long journey west. Yet Elijah's eyes never left her. Every word she spoke felt examined. Every raised glass, every polite cheer made Naomi feel more like merchandise being appraised. When the guests thinned and only a few lingered in the parlor, Elijah leaned toward her. The courteous smile vanished. His hand dropped onto hers and squeezed hard. Pain shot through her fingers. Naomi hid the gasp. Elijah's voice was low, edged with threat. There will be no delay, Naomi Carter. The moment you stepped onto my land, you signed your future. You belong to me. Tomorrow the minister speaks, and that ends the matter. His dark eyes bore into her, cold enough to hollow her out from the inside. This wasn't marriage. It was prison. Elijah released her hand and rose to entertain his guests as if he had said nothing at all. Naomi held her aching fingers in her lap, fighting tears. She had known Elijah was strict, but only now did she understand how dangerous he truly was. Time was running out. When Naomi returned to her room, she closed the door and pressed her back against it, her heartbeat breaking into rapid, uneven blows. She didn't know how long she could keep standing. Elijah already suspected Tobias. He would watch her closely now. She had barely taken 2 steps when a soft knock sounded. Naomi, it's Rosa, came a whisper. Naomi opened the door. Rosa slipped inside, her hands trembling. She glanced down the hall before shutting the door tightly. I have something for you, she murmured. She pressed a folded piece of paper into Naomi's palm. When you've read it, burn it. Naomi unfolded it, and her breath stopped. Wait for me by the northern oak at midnight. Bring only what you can carry. T. Tobias. 2 letters, yet enough to pull Naomi from drowning. She clutched the note. Rosa, Does he know anything yet? Rosa shook her head, her face tight with worry. No, but Elijah is no fool. He senses something wrong. And if he sees the two of you look at each other even one heartbeat too long, I fear what he would do. A shiver ran through Naomi. Rosa took her hand, gripping hard. Go, Naomi. I have seen what he becomes when he loses control. You cannot stay here. Those words drew the final line in the sand. Naomi made her decision. She would leave. Near midnight, Naomi packed what little she could. A small bag, an extra dress, her mother's hairbrush, and the modest amount of money she'd brought from Georgia. She wrapped herself in a dark shawl, listening to the ticking of the clock in Chun, the parlor, each second counting down to the most critical moment of her life. When Elijah's lamp finally went dark, Naomi waited a little longer. The ranch sank into silence, broken only by the desert wind dragging red dust across the yard. She opened her door and moved lightly, each step careful. The floorboards creaked faintly, making her hold her breath. By the time she reached the kitchen, she found the back door already ajar, the hinge oiled, prepared. Rosa had helped her. Naomi stepped outside. The night air was cold, biting, but she had never felt freer. In the silver wash of the moon, the northern oak stood like a familiar silhouette. Tobias was there. He didn't speak at once. He didn't rush to her. He simply stood in the shadows, and his eyes, dark, deep, made Naomi feel he could see every fear and every hope inside her. You came, Tobias said softly, his voice a quiet release. Naomi moved toward him, heart pounding. I can't stay. And I won't let you, Tobias replied, simple as a vow. 2 horses stood saddled behind him, waiting. Charlie lent them to me, Tobias said. He understands. He lifted Naomi onto the smaller horse. His hands at her waist were brief, steady, but enough to tell her she was no longer alone. When Tobias mounted his own horse, he looked at her once more before turning north. Let's ride, he said, before Elijah realizes we're gone. They spurred their horses into the night, leaving behind the ranch lights, the threats, and the wedding Elijah meant to force onto her life. Wind rushed across her face. The night opened wide. At last, Naomi rode toward freedom, and she rode beside the man her heart had chosen. The Arizona sky had been heavy all afternoon, but as soon as Naomi and Tobias crossed the northern pasture, the wind shifted sharply. Dark clouds rolled together as if pulled tight by an unseen hand, sign of a storm racing down from the far mountains. Tobias looked back, tension in his eyes. This isn't good. The storm's coming earlier than I thought. But they had no time to worry about the weather. Behind them, hoofbeats cracked against the ground. Fast, ruthless. Naomi turned. 5 riders cut across the plain, red dust swirling behind them like smoke. Leading the charge was Elijah Red. He rode a massive black horse, his tall frame towering against the storm-dark sky. Lightning flashed, lighting the rage in his face, freezing Naomi's breath. Tobias, I know, he said quietly. They've found us. Elijah's shout tore through the wind. Stop! Tobias pushed his horse harder, guiding Naomi across the dry grass toward the jagged stones near Apache Canyon. But Tobias knew one thing. If they stayed together, Elijah would hunt them both to the end. And if caught, Elijah's fury would fall on Naomi or on him. As they rode, Tobias scanned the land. Suddenly he pulled hard on the reins, forcing Naomi to stop. Naomi, listen to me, Tobias said over the wind. We have to split up. No, Naomi cried. We stay together. We can't. Tobias stepped down, moving close to her. Elijah won't hurt you. Not right away. His pride won't let him. You're his proof of control. And you? I'll draw them off. No. Naomi reached for his shirt, gripping it with trembling hands. I'm not letting you. Tobias cupped her face with both hands, lightning cutting the sky behind him. Their fifth touch, and one of the hardest moments they had ever faced. Naomi. His voice was low, shaking, but strong. I will find you. Tears streamed down her cheeks, cold in the wind. I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'll lose you. Tobias pressed his forehead to hers. You won't lose me. Not tonight. He kissed her forehead, quick, desperate. Then, before she could speak again, Tobias swung onto his horse and tore west, straight toward Apache Canyon, where the storm clouds were gathering thick and low. Elijah saw. After him! 3 riders broke away and chased Tobias. Elijah turned back to Naomi. And you, come with me. A rider seized Naomi's reins. She struggled, but she couldn't break free. Hot tears streaked her face, lost in the storm wind. As they dragged her back toward the ranch, thunder rolled like a war drum. Elijah didn't look at Naomi once. His fury was fixed on Tobias alone. But Tobias had led him into the worst place to follow on a storm night. Apache Canyon, where rain from 3 ridges poured into one narrow cut of stone. Sheriff Maddox and Johnson intercepted Elijah just as he was about to charge back out. Mr. Red, the sheriff shouted. Don't go in there. That canyon will flood. Elijah's eyes burned. I'll catch him, if I have to ride into hell itself. He spurred his horse forward, ignoring the warning. Minutes after he disappeared, the sky split open with a crack that shook the ground. Water dumped from the cliffs in white sheets. Then came the roar, a sound like a giant beast waking. Flash flood. Sheriff Maddox, Johnson, and 2 others backed away. No one could enter the canyon now. In the flashes of lightning, they saw shapes, horses, men, swept through the churning water, then vanish. By dawn, Naomi sat in the kitchen, hands locked around a cup of tea she couldn't drink. Her face was pale as ash. Sheriff Maddox stepped inside, hat soaked, coat heavy with mud. He looked at her, and his expression sank. Elijah Red is dead, he said quietly. 2 of the 3 men with him as well. Naomi couldn't breathe for a moment. She asked only one question, her voice thin as thread. And Tobias? The sheriff lowered his head. No body, no horse, no sign of him. He met her eyes. We don't know if he's alive. Naomi collapsed into the chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Tobias wasn't dead. She felt it. She knew it. But the truth before her was still cold and sharp. He had vanished into the flood. The night Elijah died, the ranch fell into a silence so heavy Naomi could hardly breathe. Her bedroom door had been locked from the outside, as if Elijah's death wasn't enough to free her from being treated as someone who belonged to him. Naomi sat in the dark, clutching her shawl, eyes burning from tears, but her heart burning more fiercely from one unshakable belief. Tobias was not dead. She felt it, a thread between them drawn tight by instinct alone. There was no proof, yet nothing on earth could move her from it. At first light, Naomi pounded on the door, calling for Sheriff Maddox. When he finally appeared, exhaustion carved into his face, she spoke at once, almost pleading. Sheriff, let me join the search, please. Miss Carter, that area is dangerous. You don't know the terrain. I have to go. Naomi's voice broke. Tobias isn't dead. I know he isn't. The sheriff studied her a long moment, weighing more than logic, seeing the resolve of a woman who would walk through fire if she had to. At last he sighed. All right, but you're going with Charlie. He knows every crack of that canyon. Charlie Wilkes, the young ranch hand she'd met by the stables, rode up with worry in his eyes. Miss Naomi, Tobias is tough. If anyone could survive that flood, it's him. Those words gave Naomi enough strength to climb onto her horse. They rode all day, from the dirt road leading toward Apache Canyon into narrow tracks that only range horses trusted. The flood's path lay everywhere. Broken branches, deep gouges torn into the soil, stones rolled down from the cliffs, still slick with rain. Tobias might have taken shelter somewhere, Charlie said, scanning the rock pockets. If he climbed high enough before the water hit. Naomi clung to each word as if they were thin threads of hope. The sun dipped lower, brushing the ridge with muted red. Cold wind drifted from the canyon, carrying the scent of mud and storm water. Naomi's heart sank. They had searched since morning. No tracks, no voice calling back to hers. She wanted to believe, but sometimes belief hurt like a wound. Miss Naomi. Charlie halted his horse, head tilted. You hear that? Naomi held her breath. At first, only wind. Then, a thin sound, barely there, like breath scraping stone, a faint groan. Charlie's voice cracked. There's someone down there. They dismounted and scrambled down the loose, jagged slope. When Naomi drew close, she saw a figure slumped in a rocky hollow, covered in mud and dried blood, clothes torn. Tobias. He was trying to sit upright, one leg twisted painfully, his face pale beneath the rough stubble of a long night. But his eyes lifted at the exact second Naomi reached him. Naomi. His voice was strained, dry as the canyon walls. Naomi dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as they touched his face. Tobias, dear God, you're alive, I thought. She couldn't finish before they were holding each other, tight enough for her to hear his heart beating against her own. Tobias pulled her close, not caring that blood seeped from his shoulder. I tried to climb, he murmured. The water took the horse. I thought I'd never see you again. Naomi buried her face in his neck, tears falling fast. I knew you weren't gone. I knew it. I felt it. I can't lose you. Tobias lifted a trembling hand to her cheek. Each touch a reminder that she was real, that he was alive, that they had found one another again in the vast ruin of the land. If not for you, he whispered, I would have given up long ago. Charlie stepped back, turning away to give them space, but Naomi still heard him murmur, Thank the good Lord, Tobias is alive. Naomi helped Tobias rise. He wavered, but refused to fall. They leaned on each other, two people held upright by the same fragile hope. We're taking you home, Naomi said, her voice trembling but firm. Tobias nodded, warmth flickering through the pain in his eyes. Our home will be different, Naomi. I promise. And in the last light of day, on that scarred stretch of land after the flood, Naomi understood. It wasn't Elijah who decided her fate. It wasn't the storm. It was her choice, and his. And together, they would shape whatever lay ahead. After Tobias was found, Dust Ridge seemed to breathe again. Charlie rode ahead to deliver the news. Sheriff Maddox met them at the ranch gate, and Rosa wept until her eyes reddened as she saw Tobias alive, though wrapped in bandages across his shoulder and leg. But the peace lasted only a morning. By noon, a dark carriage stopped before the main house. From it stepped a tall woman with silver hair pulled back neatly, her eyes sharp but not cold. She introduced herself, her voice low and worn. "I am Judith Red, Elijah's sister." She had come to settle what remained of her brother's affairs, and to face the woman Elijah had intended to marry. Their first meeting took place in the parlor. Naomi sat beside Tobias, her hand resting lightly on his, though neither wanted others to notice. Judith studied them for a long moment. There was no accusation in her gaze, not even the hint of it. "The sheriff has told me everything," Judith began. "Elijah stopped being the man I once knew a long time ago. He changed after our parents died. I blame no one for what happened, least of all you, Naomi." Naomi lowered her head, grateful. Tobias straightened, though a guarded look stayed in his eyes. Judith turned to him. "Mr. Red, I've heard much about you. Not from Elijah, he would never admit such things, but from the people who worked here." Tobias said nothing, but Naomi felt the shift in his breathing. "For years," Judith continued, "you held this ranch together. Through droughts, lost cattle, and Elijah's misjudgments, it was you who corrected the course." She met Tobias's eyes directly. "He owed you more than anyone." Tobias opened his mouth to object, but Judith lifted a hand. "Elijah never valued those who were better than him. You bore far more than your share. It's time for things to be fair." She reached into her leather satchel and removed a stack of sealed legal documents. "My family will not keep Dust Ridge. The property will be sold to settle debts and any remaining claims." Naomi lowered her gaze, her heart tightening. The ranch held painful memories, but it was also the place where she found Tobias. But Judith wasn't finished. "In the last 2 weeks, I reviewed the books, contracts, and letters." Her gaze settled on Tobias with quiet weight. "And I've decided you will receive 100 acres in the Eastern Valley, land Elijah never cared for, though it is some of the most profitable he owned." Naomi froze. Tobias did too, as if he had not heard correctly. Judith continued, "This is not because Elijah wished it. It is because you earned it, and because I intend to return to you at least a part of what you never demanded." At last Tobias found his voice. "Ma'am, I did nothing but my duty. I don't need—" Judith shook her head firmly. "You gave far more than duty, and this is not given as a reward. It is given so you may have a true beginning, something Elijah never allowed you." That afternoon, Tobias walked to the rise overlooking the broad sweep of the valley, where the horizon cut clean against the golden grass. Naomi stood beside him, sunlight brushing over their shoulders. "Do you want it?" Naomi asked, her voice soft yet sincere. Tobias stayed silent a moment. "I used to think I'd die with nothing to my name, just another drifter working ranch to ranch, but 100 acres." He exhaled slowly. "Naomi, that's a whole new life." She looked at him. The man who had stood at the edge of death, had risked everything for her freedom, had held her face in his hands while danger closed in. And she understood, as clearly as the evening light burning across the grass. She wanted that new life with him. No more obligations. No one choosing for her. Naomi stepped closer and placed her hand over his. The first time without hiding, without fear of who might see. "You don't have to start it alone," she said. her voice low but steady. "If you'll let me, I want to be there." Tobias turned to her. His eyes were deep, but this time they held no fear, only gratitude and quiet joy. "Naomi, I can't imagine any future without you." The evening wind swept across the valley, carrying the scent of new earth, like a blessing from the land itself, for the beginning they had won through courage and choice. Spring in the eastern valley carried a quiet kind of beauty, as if the land itself drew a long breath after the cold months. On the hilltop, where green grass sloped down toward a narrow creek, Tobias stood beside Naomi, the wind brushing her skirt like wildflowers stirred by light. The new land belonged to him, but from the first moment he walked it, Tobias knew his future was not the soil beneath his boots, but the woman standing at his side. Naomi looked over the valley, her eyes softening. "It's beautiful. It feels like this place has been waiting for someone for a long time." Tobias stood still, gathering years of courage into a single breath. He turned toward her, his dark eyes steady yet trembling, a rare sight in a man who had weathered so much. "Naomi," she lifted her gaze, "I don't have a ring. I don't have anything fine to place in your hand, only my heart. But if that's enough—" He paused, afraid his voice might break. "Will you be my wife? Not because of the past, not because of circumstance, but because we choose each other." A sudden gust swept across the hill, like the valley exhaling. Naomi covered her mouth, tears shimmering, not out of surprise, but because this was the moment her heart had been waiting for. "Tobias," her voice wavered. "Yes. From the moment I ran toward you in that canyon, I knew what my heart had chosen." Tobias drew her into his arms. Not hurried, not fierce, just a deep, quiet embrace, as if two lives once split by hardship were finally mended. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Dust Ridge's small church. The minister spoke in a tone as gentle as morning light. There were only a few people present: Sheriff Maddox, Charlie, several townsfolk, and Rosa, who wept from the moment Naomi entered until Tobias kissed his wife's forehead. Rosa rushed to hold Naomi afterward, crying and stammering, "You deserved this love, Naomi. The Lord heard you." Naomi smiled through her own tears. No grand ceremony, no display of power or wealth, only two people standing before God, wholly free, wholly belonging to one another. Tobias and Naomi began building their first home in the valley, a small wooden house with a broad porch facing the open grass. They named it New Promise, a new vow, not a promise forced between strangers as fate once intended, but a promise freely made between two hearts that chose each other in their darkest hour. In the first year, they planted grazing grass, raised a small barn, and dug a well. In the second, Tobias expanded the pasture, while Naomi started a little orchard on the hillside. She told Tobias that their future daughter would one day love to sit beneath those trees and read. Tobias only smiled, his eyes filled with quiet hope. By the third year, the sound of children's boots echoed across New Promise. One child laughing atop a small brown pony, another running after Naomi with a watering can, and the youngest clinging to Tobias's leg whenever he repaired the fence. Life was busy, but peaceful, hard, but sweet. No chains except love and gratitude. Years later, on a honey gold evening, Naomi stood on the porch watching her children chase one another through the grass. The breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of the land she had chosen, the land Tobias had turned into a home. Tobias stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Naomi leaned into him, her smile soft as wind. I'm thinking of the day I came west, with a small trunk and a frightened heart. She looked out at the valley, where New Promise stood firm as witness to their journey. That trunk was meant for a stranger, she whispered. But in the end, it led me to the man the Lord had intended for me. Tobias tightened his hold, answering without words. And that evening, New Promise glowed, proof that what is built from true love stands longer than any storm. If this story stirs an old memory, a kept promise, or even a moment that once moved your heart, please share it below. I would be honored to hear your stories, your long journeys. If you'd like to travel with more gentle tales like this, feel free to like, subscribe, and share the video so other hearts may find their warmth too. Thank you for staying until the end of today's journey. Wishing you a peaceful evening.